On a cold April night in 1945, as bombs shattered the streets of Berlin and the Third Reich collapsed around him, a young German officer received a sealed envelope. Inside was a single sentence: "If the world discovers what is hidden beneath the mountains, history will have to be rewritten." The officer never spoke of that envelope again. He disappeared 3 days later. For decades, historians searched for answers. Some believed it was a myth. Others believed it was the greatest secret of World War II. And in the spring of 1978, an American journalist would stumble upon the first clue. The rain fell heavily over Washington, D.C. in March 1978. Thomas Walker sat alone in a dusty corner of the National Archives. He was 38 years old, a veteran investigative reporter, and a man whose career had been built on exposing secrets. Most journalists dreamed of uncovering corruption. Thomas dreamed of uncovering history. The Cold War dominated headlines. The Soviet Union and the United States stood locked in a global rivalry. Yet Thomas found himself obsessed with a different mystery: the final days of Nazi Germany. Millions had died. Entire cities had been destroyed. Empires had collapsed. But questions remained unanswered. Where had the Nazi gold gone? What happened to countless missing documents? Why did several high-ranking officials disappear without a trace? For years, rumors circulated about hidden tunnels, underground factories, secret laboratories, and lost treasures buried deep beneath the mountains of Germany and Austria. Most historians dismissed such stories as legends. Thomas wasn't so sure. On that rainy afternoon, he requested a box of declassified intelligence reports collected by American forces after World War II. The archivist wheeled the box toward him. "Nothing exciting in there," the elderly man said. Thomas smiled. "That's usually when things get interesting." Hours passed. The documents contained familiar material: interrogation reports, captured correspondence, military assessments. Then he found something strange. A single report dated June 1945. The document described the interrogation of a captured German railway administrator. The man had revealed that during the final weeks of the war, several trains left Berlin carrying unidentified cargo. The trains traveled south toward Bavaria. Official records described them as military transports, yet witnesses claimed they were heavily guarded by SS troops. The cargo manifests were missing. The destinations were redacted. Most curious of all, investigators had attached a handwritten note. The note read, "Possible connection to Alpine Redoubt operations. Further investigation recommended." Thomas leaned forward. The phrase caught his attention. Alpine Redoubt. The legendary Nazi plan. According to intelligence reports, some believed Adolf Hitler intended to establish a final fortress in the Alps, a heavily fortified region stretching across southern Germany and western Austria. From there, Nazi loyalists could continue resistance for years. After the war, investigators found evidence that large quantities of supplies had indeed been moved into mountain regions, but no massive fortress was ever discovered. Many concluded the plan had been propaganda. Yet some questions remained. Thomas copied the file number into his notebook. Then he continued searching. Near sunset, he discovered another report. This one originated from American intelligence officers operating in occupied Germany during 1946. It referenced an abandoned tunnel complex near the Bavarian Alps. Several soldiers had entered the tunnels. According to their account, they found evidence of recent activity: machinery, rail tracks, storage rooms, even electrical systems. But the deepest sections had collapsed before they could be explored. The report ended abruptly.
No follow-up investigation appeared in the archive.
Thomas felt a familiar surge of excitement. A story was emerging. Maybe not treasure, maybe not a conspiracy, but certainly a mystery. The next morning, he booked a flight to West Germany. At the same time, thousands of miles away, an elderly man sat alone in a small village near the Austrian border. His name was Karl Weiss. He was 72 years old. His hands trembled with age. His eyesight had weakened, but his memory remained sharp, especially when it came to April 1945. The nightmares never stopped. Every spring they returned. The explosions, the smoke, the screams, and the envelope. The envelope he had carried from Berlin. Karl opened a wooden drawer. Inside lay a faded photograph. Then he looked toward the mountains beyond his window. Those mountains had hidden secrets for more than 30 years. Secrets buried beneath stone and steel. Secrets men had killed to protect. The world believed the war ended in 1945. Karl knew otherwise, because some operations continued long after the surrender. And one of those operations involved a discovery so extraordinary that even senior Nazi leaders feared its implications. A knock interrupted his thoughts. Karl froze. Nobody visited unexpectedly. Not anymore. Another knock echoed through the house. Dark-haired, holding a notebook. Thomas Walker smiled politely. Mr. Karl Weiss? Karl's face turned pale. For a moment, he looked as though he had seen a ghost. Then he whispered 3 words. Words he had not spoken aloud for decades. They found me. And suddenly, he slammed the door shut. Thomas stood motionless. The old man's reaction was not normal. It wasn't the reaction of someone annoyed by a journalist. It was fear. Pure fear. The kind of fear people carried for a lifetime. As Thomas turned away, preparing to leave, he noticed movement behind a nearby curtain. Karl was watching him. Watching carefully, as though trying to decide whether Thomas was a threat or a warning. Thomas had no idea that his search for a forgotten wartime mystery had just placed him on a path leading toward one of the most astonishing hidden stories of the 20th century. A story involving secret underground cities, missing wartime treasures, classified intelligence operations, former Nazis, Cold War spies, and a discovery hidden beneath the mountains since the final days of the Third Reich. Karl Weiss stood frozen behind the curtain. Outside, rain drummed softly against the stone path leading to his house. Thomas Walker had already begun walking away. The journalist's figure slowly disappeared through the mist that rolled down from the mountains. Only then did Karl breathe again. For more than 30 years, he had lived with a promise made in the final days of the war. A promise enforced by fear. And now, an American reporter had arrived at his doorstep asking questions that should never have been asked. Karl moved quickly. Despite his age, his hands remained surprisingly steady. He crossed the room and unlocked a small iron chest hidden beneath loose floorboards. Inside were several objects. A faded military identification card, a silver pocket watch, a rusted key, and a leather notebook. The notebook had survived bombings, interrogations, border crossings, and decades of silence. Karl opened it carefully. The pages were yellow with age. Near the center was an entry dated April 27, 1945. His eyes stopped on a single sentence.
The convoy reached Site Adler at 2:40. Contents transferred underground. Even now, the words made his stomach tighten. Site Adler. Officially, it had never existed. No map showed its location. No government acknowledged its construction. Yet Carl had seen it with his own eyes. He remembered every detail. The endless tunnels, the elevators descending into darkness, the massive steel doors, and what lay behind them. A loud knock suddenly echoed through the house. Carl nearly dropped the notebook. Someone was at the door again. But this time it wasn't Thomas. The knock was different, harder, more deliberate. Carl approached slowly. When he opened the door, a black Mercedes was parked outside. A man in a dark coat stood waiting. He looked to be in his 50s. Tall, clean-shaven, cold blue eyes. The stranger spoke German. "You received a visitor." Carl's face went pale.
The man continued. "An American journalist." Carl said nothing. The stranger smiled slightly. "You should have informed us." A chill swept through Carl's body. Only a handful of people still knew about the organization, and none of them should have known Thomas Walker had arrived. Yet somehow they did. The stranger stepped closer. "We need to talk." Meanwhile, Thomas checked into a small hotel 20 miles away. The village where Carl lived was quiet. Too quiet. As he unpacked his notes, he replayed the encounter in his mind. Carl's fear had been genuine. Not annoyance, not confusion. Fear. The reaction of someone protecting a dangerous secret. Thomas spread documents across the bed. One report mentioned railway shipments. Another referenced underground facilities. A third listed several missing officers. As he compared names, something caught his attention. One officer appeared repeatedly. Major Ernst Keller. The name surfaced in transportation records, construction reports, and classified intelligence summaries. Yet, after May 1945, he vanished completely. No death certificate, no prisoner record, no witness testimony, nothing. It was as if he had simply ceased to exist. Thomas opened another folder. Inside was a blurry photograph taken by Allied reconnaissance aircraft in April 1945. At first glance, it showed nothing unusual. Mountains, forests, snow. Then he noticed something. Near the base of a ridge was a narrow rail line. The tracks disappeared directly into solid rock. Thomas leaned closer. A tunnel entrance, hidden among the mountains. His pulse quickened. He checked the photo coordinates. The location was less than 50 miles from Carl's village. Coincidence seemed increasingly unlikely. That same night, Carl sat across from the stranger in his living room. Neither man touched the coffee resting between them. The visitor introduced himself only as Becker. No first name, no identification, nothing. "We've monitored inquiries before," Becker said calmly. "Most people lose interest." Carl remained silent. "This journalist won't." The old man looked toward the window. Rain continued falling outside. "What do you want from me?" Becker folded his hands. "If he asks questions, you know nothing." Carl laughed bitterly. "After 33 years? Especially after 33 years." The room fell silent. Finally, Carl spoke. "Why are you still protecting it?" Becker's expression hardened. "Because some discoveries are more dangerous than weapons." Carl stared at him. The answer sounded rehearsed, as though it had been repeated many times. Then Becker stood.
Before leaving, he placed a small photograph on the table. Carl looked down. His blood turned cold. The photograph showed Thomas Walker entering his hotel, taken only hours earlier. Becker moved toward the door. "Be careful, Herr Weiss." Then he left. The following morning, Thomas rented a car. The mountain roads twisted through forests and valleys. By noon, he reached the coordinates shown.
In the reconnaissance photograph, the area appeared deserted. No buildings, no signs, nothing. Only mountains. Yet something felt strange. The terrain didn't match the aerial image. Thomas parked and began hiking. For nearly an hour, he climbed through dense pine forests. Then, he found it. A concrete structure hidden beneath vegetation. Most of it was buried. Nature had reclaimed much of the site. But parts remained visible. Rusted metal, broken fencing, collapsed watchtowers. His heart raced. This had once been a military installation. Thomas photographed everything. As he moved deeper into the forest, he discovered fragments of rail tracks. The tracks ended abruptly at a cliff face, exactly where the aerial photo showed the tunnel entrance. But now there was no entrance, only solid rock, or so it seemed. Thomas examined the surface carefully. Then he noticed a straight line, perfectly vertical, too perfect to be natural. His breath caught. A sealed doorway. Hidden behind decades of weathering, the tunnel entrance had been intentionally closed. Someone wanted it erased. Suddenly, he heard an engine, a vehicle. Close, very close. Thomas quickly moved behind a cluster of trees. Moments later, a dark SUV appeared on a nearby road. Two men stepped out. Neither wore uniforms. Both carried radios. One pointed toward the mountainside. The other scanned the area with binoculars. Thomas remained perfectly still. His instincts screamed danger. These weren't tourists. They weren't hikers. And they weren't here by accident. One of the men walked directly toward the hidden entrance. He knelt near the rock face and inspected something invisible from Thomas's position. A few moments later, both men returned to the SUV and drove away. Thomas waited 10 minutes before moving. When he finally approached the location, he found fresh footprints and something else. A cigarette, still warm. Someone had been monitoring the site. Recently. Very recently. Thomas picked up the cigarette and stared toward the mountains. For the first time, he realized he wasn't simply investigating history. History was watching back. And somewhere beneath those mountains, whatever had terrified Carl Weiss for more than 3 decades remained hidden in darkness.